I woke to the soft cry of Lila, her tiny fists scrabbling against the blanket, and something on the edge of the crib caught my eye. A crumpled piece of paper, scribbled in hurried, uneven handwriting. "I can't do this. I'm gone." My chest seized, the words hitting like cold water. I read it again, half expecting some explanation, some reassurance. Nothing, just 5 words, abandoned on top of my newborn like a cruel joke. I sank onto the edge of the bed, Lila trembling against my chest, her soft whimpers echoing in the small apartment. My hands shook as I rocked her, trying to steady both of us. And I realized the note wasn't taped down, it was just left there, as if whoever wrote it thought I'd find it clever. I didn't. Questions barreled through my head. How long had he planned this? Why leave her in my arms? So small and helpless, with no warning, no support. Panic clawed at me, my body tensing, every nerve screaming that I was utterly alone. Then, like a shadow over everything, I remembered my mother. Margaret had been distant my whole life, emotionally absent in ways I had long buried. The thought of calling her for help was almost laughable. She had never been the kind of mother who stepped in when it mattered. And now, at the moment I needed her most, I knew I couldn't rely on her. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and tried to breathe while Lila's cries punctuated the quiet apartment. I held her close, rocking in a rhythm that barely kept panic at bay. The room felt impossibly small, and yet I knew that somehow I had to begin. Somehow, I had to survive this alone. The first night stretched before us, long and unyielding, and I realized that life had shifted in a way I could never undo. I tightened my grip on Lila, knowing that the world outside our apartment walls didn't pause for heartbreak or despair. The first morning hit like a freight train. Lila was awake before sunrise, crying with a pitch that cut through my fog of exhaustion. My arms ached from holding her, my eyes stinging from a night that had passed in a blur of feeding, rocking, and pacing. Every routine I had imagined as a mother vanished the moment I tried to put it into practice. Diaper changes became a frantic scramble, bottles spilled across the counter, and the laundry pile grew higher than I had ever thought possible. Each task reminded me of how alone I really was. The silence of the apartment, except for Lila's wails, pressed down on me. A constant reminder that I couldn't rely on anyone. I noticed the neighbors through the thin walls. Some murmured as I passed the hallway. Others glanced at the baby in my arms with something like judgment or pity, I couldn't tell which. Their eyes felt heavy, a weight I wasn't ready to carry. Then Harlan appeared. He lived a floor down, retired Marine. Quiet and steady. He didn't offer advice right away. He just watched as I fumbled with bottles, adjusting Lila in my arms, and nodded when he saw me finally get her settled. A small gesture, almost invisible, but it gave me a fraction of reassurance that I hadn't realized I needed. The day stretched on, each minute a test of stamina, patience, and resolve. I realized there was no pause button, no one to step in. Somehow, I had to keep going. Chapter 3. Seeking Help. I picked up the phone and dialed my mother's number, my hands trembling slightly as Lila fussed in her bassinet beside me. The line rang once, twice, then her voice came through, clipped and distant. "Hello?" she said, the single word carrying more judgment than concern. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Mom, I need help. Lila's here, and I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end. Then, almost dismissively, she replied, "You knew this could happen. You chose him. You need to handle it." My throat went dry. That was it. No offer to watch Lila for an hour. No advice. No help at all, just words that echoed the same disappointment I had grown up with. I hung up slowly, my chest tight, and tried to focus on the practical matters. Rent was due next week, and my landlord had already called twice, his tone impatient and unyielding. If I didn't pay on time, he said, he would evict me. I counted the money I had in my wallet, realizing it wouldn't cover both rent and groceries. Next, I tried contacting daycare centers, hoping for some support. One had a waiting list 3 months long. Another couldn't accommodate infants under 2 months. Each no felt like a hammer blow, but I forced myself to take notes, make calls, and keep looking. I made a list of jobs that might fit around feeding and napping schedules, filling the whiteboard in the kitchen with options. Each day became a balancing act, juggling survival, care for Lila, and the gnawing awareness that I had to do everything alone. The apartment felt smaller, the hours longer, and yet I kept moving, one task at a time, determined to find a way through. Harlan knocked on my door early the next morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a calm presence that seemed to fill the small apartment. He didn't ask questions or lecture. He just watched as I tried to adjust Lila in her carrier, struggling to balance the bottles and diaper bag. Then, quietly, he showed me the rhythm he had learned raising his own kids long ago: feed, burp, pack, check the straps, and move. Step by step, he guided me, demonstrating how to maneuver the stroller through the narrow hallways and up the uneven curb. By the afternoon, Maya arrived. She introduced herself with a firm but friendly smile and handed me a toolkit that looked like it had seen better days. "Locksmith work," she said. "Flexible hours, enough to pay the bills, and you can do it while keeping Lila close." I nodded, trying to mask the fear that rose in my chest at the thought of juggling a newborn with a new trade. She demonstrated the basic techniques, letting me practice on old locks and mailboxes, correcting my mistakes patiently. Each click and turn felt like a small victory, proof I could manage more than I thought. The very next day, Lila's fever spiked. The daycare called, unable to take her for the week. Panic clenched my chest. But I remembered Harlan's words: take one step at a time. I improvised, rearranging my appointments, making quick meals, and carrying Lila everywhere with me. Maya lent a hand when she could, showing me shortcuts to keep up with the work I had scheduled. Hours blurred together. Bottles, locks, laundry, calls all collided. But I started to see a pattern, a rhythm that kept me moving instead of collapsing. I learned to anticipate Lila's needs while keeping an eye on my own, noticing how small adjustments could prevent disaster. By nightfall, I sat in the quiet apartment, Lila asleep in my arms, tools and bottles scattered around me. Exhaustion pressed into every muscle, but beneath it was a new kind of certainty. I could do this. I wasn't just surviving. I was learning how to manage, how to bend without breaking. By the end of the second week, a rhythm had begun to take shape. I woke before Lila, prepared bottles, and dressed her while checking the day's work schedule on my phone. I carried her to daycare, navigating the bus and the crowded sidewalks with a practiced grip on the stroller. Each small step reinforced a truth I hadn't allowed myself to feel before I could do this. I could manage. At daycare, Lila settled quickly into the routine. The teachers called her bright and curious, noting how she reached for the blocks and smiled at the other children. Watching her adapt reminded me that I wasn't failing her, that my efforts were enough. I returned to work with Maya, fitting my locksmith jobs around her naps and feedings. The first few assignments had been shaky, but now I moved through them with purpose, confident in my abilities. Bills were paid, groceries stocked, and the apartment, while far from perfect, felt like ours. I discovered that I didn't need my mother to step in, that I didn't need my ex to validate my worth. Every successful day reinforced that independence wasn't just a necessity, it was a source of pride, a testament to how far I had come. There were moments of exhaustion. Of course, when the weight of responsibility pressed hard, when I questioned whether I could keep up forever. But the small victories: Lila's laughter, a job completed without mistake, a meal on the table stacked like bricks, building a foundation stronger than any fear or doubt. I realized that survival alone wasn't enough. I had begun to thrive. My confidence grew with each choice I made, each obstacle I navigated. The apartment, once a space of panic and uncertainty, had become a place of movement, of control, of proof that I was capable of shaping our lives. The knock at the door came mid-afternoon, sharp and deliberate. I opened it to find Margaret standing there, grocery bag in hand, her expression a careful mix of concern and expectation. "Selena," she said, voice tight but measured. "I thought I'd come by. I wanted to see Lila, see how you're doing." For a moment, I just stared. The same mother who had left years ago, who had been absent through all the milestones, the nights I couldn't sleep, the first cries and first smiles, was suddenly here, offering help she had never given before. Anger flared in my chest, and old wounds ached as if they had never healed. I felt the urge to slam the door, to let her knock in vain, but I held it open, steadying my voice. "I'm doing fine," I said firmly. "We're fine." Lila stirred in her high chair, her eyes tracking Margaret, curious but cautious. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of history pressing down on the three of us. Margaret stepped closer, as if proximity alone could erase the years of absence. "I know I wasn't there before, but I want to help now," she said, voice softening. I shook my head. "You're welcome to visit, but no dropping in unannounced. No interfering. Lila's schedule comes first, and I make the decisions here." Her smile faltered slightly, but she nodded, clearly testing boundaries. I didn't soften, didn't offer reassurance beyond that. Lila gurgled, reaching for a toy, seemingly unconcerned, and I realized how much power I held in this moment, not through anger or confrontation, but by simply maintaining the rules I had built for our little family. Margaret's presence lingered for a few more minutes, quiet and tentative. She lingered just long enough to place the groceries on the counter and watch, measuring, before stepping back toward the door. I closed it behind her, locking it softly, the click echoing like a promise I had made to myself. Margaret returned a few days later, this time with a small gift for Lila and a string of unsolicited advice. "You should feed her more often," she said, glancing critically at the bottle I had prepared. "And that blanket too thin for this weather. I always did things differently when you were little." I held Lila close, rocking her gently. "Thank you, but I know what she needs," I said firmly. My voice didn't waver. Lila gurgled against my chest, oblivious to the tension, and I felt a small surge of control. This was my home, my child, my decisions. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, testing me, but I refused to engage in argument. Harlan had stopped by earlier, leaning against the counter as he watched quietly, giving nothing away. His presence reminded me that I had support, that I didn't have to navigate every challenge alone. Even if the decisions were mine to make. Maya called later, checking in and offering a few tips on adjusting Lila's schedule around my locksmith jobs. I appreciated the advice but implemented it on my terms, reinforcing my authority and competence. I realized that asserting boundaries didn't require anger or confrontation. It required clarity and consistency. Margaret lingered longer than necessary, making small suggestions on bedtime routines and meal schedules, trying to insert herself into our daily life. Each comment tested my patience, dredging up memories of the absences and disappointments from my own childhood. I held firm, calmly redirecting the conversation, guiding Lila's attention to her toys, and showing Margaret that while she could visit, control remained mine. By the time she left, I was exhausted but resolute. I had maintained authority without escalating conflict, and Lila had remained safe and content throughout. This small victory felt monumental. Chapter 8. Demonstrating strength by midweek. Our apartment had settled into a rhythm that felt almost unshakable. Lila played on the floor, stacking blocks while I checked my job schedule and responded to emails for locksmith work. I moved through the tasks with focus, bottles prepared, laundry folded, and the apartment tidy. Each small action reminded me that I was managing everything on my own, and that realization carried a quiet, steady pride. Margaret arrived unannounced, observing from the doorway. She lingered, carrying an air of expectation, clearly trying to measure how well I was coping. "You've set up quite a system," she said, almost reluctantly. "I didn't realize—" Her voice trailed, unspoken judgment hovering beneath the words. I nodded, continuing with Lila, giving instructions to her as I balanced both child and work. "It works for us," I said simply, not needing her approval. Lila reached for a block, and I guided her hands. Watching her concentration, Margaret's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't anticipated the smooth efficiency, the bond between mother and daughter that had grown strong in her absence. Later, she tested me subtly, questioning a work schedule I had arranged around Lila's naps. I explained calmly why the timing worked, maintaining my tone without argument, demonstrating both competence and authority. Margaret paused, the expression on her face softening as she realized her interference had no place here. Across the street, a neighbor waved as I carried Lila to the stroller, at daycare pickup. The teacher smiled, noting how confident and attentive I had become. Even in these small interactions, the external acknowledgement reinforced what I already knew I was capable. I was resilient, and I had created a stable life for my daughter. Margaret arrived that evening, holding a small bag of groceries, her expression tentative. I guided Lila to her high chair and gestured toward the kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded, eyes shifting between me and Lila. "I know I wasn't there before," she began, "and I want to make up for lost time." I shook my head. "This isn't about making up for anything. You were gone when it mattered. You can visit, but you follow my rules. Lila's schedule comes first. I make the decisions here." Her shoulders tensed, a flicker of frustration in her eyes, but I didn't relent. No backseat parenting, no judgment, no guilt trips. "You can care about her, but you don't get to control our life." Margaret exhaled slowly, swallowing the words she might have said, and finally nodded. Lila gurgled, reaching toward her grandmother, and I guided her hands gently, showing how we moved through routines without conflict. Margaret followed silently, careful not to overstep. For the next half hour, we sat together while I managed dinner and Lila's play, Margaret watching without offering unsolicited advice. The silence was heavy but calm, and for the first time, I felt the boundaries I had set being respected. When she finally stood to leave, she looked at Lila with something close to affection, but no expectation. "I understand," she said softly. I nodded. She stepped out, leaving the door closed behind her. No dramatic exit, no apologies forced, just a quiet acknowledgement of the rules I had established. I watched the door, feeling the weight of the past and the freedom of the present at the same time. Lila babbled from her chair, unaware of the tension that had passed, and I knew we had reached a point of balance. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow over our small apartment. Lila crawled across the living room, giggling as she chased her favorite stuffed animal, and I paused to watch her, letting a quiet pride settle in my chest. Every milestone, every smile, felt like a confirmation that I had navigated the chaos of the past months and emerged stronger, capable, and certain of my own abilities. Work had become steady, predictable in a way that allowed me to balance Lila's needs with earning a living. Maya stopped by occasionally, dropping off new assignments or checking that I was managing the schedule I had built. Harlan waved from across the hall when I carried groceries inside, a silent acknowledgement that he had seen my progress and respected the boundaries I had set for our little family. Lila thrived in daycare, forming bonds with her teachers and classmates, and returning home each afternoon with stories she babbled endlessly about. Those stories reminded me that she was growing up in a safe, nurturing environment I had worked to create. My decisions, my independence, and my vigilance had shaped this life. I realized that the absence of my mother had forced me to claim a strength I might not have discovered otherwise. Even the occasional messages from Margaret no longer carried the weight of expectation or judgment. I responded when I chose, on my terms, reinforcing the boundaries I had fought to establish. Our interactions were polite, measured, and distant enough that they did not intrude on the rhythm I had built. As the day wound down, I tucked Lila into bed, smoothing her hair and watching her drift to sleep. The apartment felt quiet, safe, and ours. I reflected on the journey that had brought us here every sleepless night, every small victory, every moment of self-doubt overcome. The family I had built was defined not by biology or absence, but by care, presence, and respect. I had learned to protect what mattered, and in doing so, I had found a strength that would guide both of us forward. The next morning, I rose with a calm certainty, ready to meet whatever challenges awaited, knowing that our life, our little family, was grounded, secure, and entirely ours.